Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the American Hotel. This is actually our last Express sessions of the spring season. We're going to be talking, we titled it Protecting Our Water because we want to talk about things we can do to help down the line, and obviously we have some really wonderful people here to help us do that. We will be returning in October and November, so we're going to take a little break for the summer. We are going to be doing an arts and cultural series over at the Sag Harbor Inn, so we'll be sending out some information about that, but I know a lot of you have been here for a few of these, and we thank you all for coming. I want to thank a few of our sponsors that have helped us present these events. The Group for the East End has been really key in helping us organize today's discussion. Since 1972, the group has led the way in protecting and restoring the environment on Eastern Long Island. They use education, conservation, advocacy, and the group, along with its president, Bob DeLuca, who has joined us today, they fight for the protection of land, water, wildlife, and they do, as I mentioned, a tremendous amount of education with children. They try to get people involved so that they can be active in conservation efforts. So thank you to the Group for the East End for helping us today. Our lead sponsors for the Express Sessions series are the Sag Harbor Chamber of Commerce, which has a group of business leaders represented here today. The Sag Harbor Variety Store, attorney John Leonard. John is with us today. Thank you, John. And also, we'd like to thank BNB Bank, the Washwick Agency, Dayton Ritz and Osborne, Saybrook Capital, and the Adam Miller Group for all their support, as well as JCP Landscaping, the Sag Harbor Inn, attorney Tiffany Scarlato, Save Sag Harbor, and Fisher's Home Furnishings. Thank you all very much. There's been a group of us who really, get these things off the ground every month, and Ellen Dioguardi, who really helps manage these events for us. Thank you, Ellen. My partner, Brian Boyhan, who is always by my side, is tremendously helpful to me. Christine Sampson and Michael Heller, who provide coverage for these events for the world to read on sagharborexpress.com, as well as LTV, who films the series and broadcasts it out on their channel. Thank you all very much. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the topic today. The focus on improving water quality on the East End has intensified in the last several years as it became clear that residential and commercial development was impairing the bays and estuaries key to maintaining the local ecology. Our waterways also serve as a major economic driver for a region dependent on tourism and second homeowner economy to support our local business. Through the work of nonprofits like Concerned Citizens of Montauk, Defend H2O, and the Group for the East End, who are all helping us here today, and through initiatives like the expansion of the Community Preservation Fund to allow local governments to earmark a percentage of that 2% transfer tax for water quality projects, the South Fork appears poised to tackle the issue of improving water quality head-on. However, development pressure remains a serious threat. There is still a lack of legislation protecting water quality from pollution via pesticides. The emergence of PFOAs and PFOS in areas like Wainscott and West Hampton Beach has raised concerns about the safety of our drinking water. And I'd like to just read a statement from Jeffrey Sabo, the Chief Executive Officer of the Suffolk County Water Authority. We asked him to join us today, but he couldn't be here. The Suffolk County Water Authority conducts tests for water quality far more frequently than required by law and maintains internal standards for water quality that are often more rigorous than standards set by the state and federal government. We also test for far more chemicals than required. In 2018, for example, we tested for 400 chemicals, though we're only required to test for 149. The commitment to water quality has been seen recently on the South Fork through our efforts to address the area's most significant recent water quality issue, the contamination of groundwater by the perfluorinated compounds PFOS and PFOA. The Water Authority has proactively addressed these compounds in private wells in Wainscott and the West Hampton area. In Wainscott, SCWA, in partnership with the town of East Hampton, constructed 45,000 feet of water main in just a few months to ensure a safe drinking water supply for residents with private wells impacted. He would also like to note several other initiatives that they're working on to improve water quality. 2 new pump stations are under construction, one on Deerfield Road in Watermill and one on Stephen Hand's Path in East Hampton, and will be ready in time for the peak summer season. A 3rd well has been added to the Sag Harbor Turnpike pump station in the Sag Harbor area to boost water supply. A 1 million gallon ground storage reservoir on Cross Highway in Amagansett is expected to be in operation by the summer of 2020. A 24-inch pipe constructed along 5 miles of Spionk Riverhead Road will boost the water supply available in the West Hampton area. Additionally, pipe improvements in the area of Noyak, just south of Noyak Road, will alleviate low-pressure issues in that area. So thank you for Mr. Sabo for weighing in. Also in the news recently, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation announced it would allow the Sandland mine in Noyak to operate for an additional 8 years, despite the fact that the County Health Department determined last year the mine is impacting our sole source aquifer. So there's still a lot of work to be done, and which is where these folks come into play. We have Bridget Fleming, our Suffolk County legislator, Justin Jobin, the Environmental Projects Coordinator with the Suffolk County Department of Health Services, Kevin McAllister, the founding president of Defend H2O, Bob DeLuca, the president of Group for the East End, Laura Tuman, who's the executive director of the Concerned Citizens of Montauk, and Robbie Stein, who is the chairman of the Sag Harbor Zoning Board of Appeals and a former Sag Harbor Village trustee. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to introduce our panelists with a specific question to kind of lay some groundwork, and then we will open the questions and comments to the floor. Brian will bring the microphone around, and just please say your name and speak into the microphone so LTV can pick it up. I also just want to ask the panelists if they can try to answer their question in 3 to 5 minutes just to move things along. Bridget, we'll start with you. As a government representative for many local coastal communities, what do you see as the greatest challenges we face with regard to water protection?
Good afternoon, Gavin, and thank you so much for having us here. I just want to compliment, before I answer your question, I just want to compliment Sag Harbor Express for these wonderful sessions. This isn't the first. There's many so far, and I'm sure there are many more to come. I just think it's very interesting to see how you at the Express have sort of adjusted to the changing marketplace for print media in particular, and now developing your own content and having this these special editions that include the content that you are creating and bringing together is truly a wonderful reaction to changing marketplace. So I congratulate you on that, and I hope that it continues to be very successful. You're setting the pace for a lot of media. And in answer to your question, so yes, we are a coastal community. I represent East Hampton, Shelter Island, Southampton, coastal Brookhaven. We have a very rich history that is derived primarily from our marine resources, and our marine resources are under threat. As you, Gavin, pointed out, that threat comes from a number of different sources. If we go back to the 1930s, Greenport produced 2.5 million bushels of oysters per year, the equivalent of about $60 million at today's market value. And not long ago, really in the 1980s, there were 6,000 very good jobs in the Great South Bay clamming, and the Great South Bay produced half of the hard-shell clams that were consumed in the United States. The first brown tide appeared in 1985. But actually before that, we were seeing our marine resources degrading. Since 1974, we have lost about 36% of our tidal wetlands. And the wetlands, especially with the onset of climate change, increased extreme weather events, and the rise of sea level, those wetlands play an extremely important role in infrastructure, protecting property and lives, truthfully, from storm surge, not to mention all the other important things that the wetlands do for us. So that alone is enough to be alarmed about and want to take action. But we really do have a threat to our water supply. We live and work over our water supply, our only water supply, and there is no viable alternative to water. So we are truly obligated to protect these supplies. We have discovered that nitrogen pollution from failing septic systems is primarily responsible, along with fertilizer, for the rising nitrogen levels in our water that contribute to low dissolved oxygen, to the loss of finfish and shellfish harvests, to the loss of eelgrass and other very important seagrass, the closure of beaches, and various other problems, including the harmful algal bloom. So we've got to do something about it. At the same time, our groundwater is threatened as well. As Gavin pointed out, Suffolk County Water Authority just undertook a $26 million project connecting 500 homes in Wainscott to public water because of the threat of perfluorinated compounds. We're seeing more emerging contaminants appearing in our waters, partly because of the good testing that's being done and the push from New York State to check for these things, but they're very serious contaminants and they have to be addressed. Long Island is unique in that we have mostly private wells, or a lot of private wells. So moving people onto public water supply that can be regularly monitored, tested, and remediated for contaminants is a huge challenge in itself. These are the challenges we're facing. We're largely unsewered on the east end of Long Island and Suffolk County. 70% of Suffolk County residences are not currently on sewers, although we've just undertaken a series of referendums that were successful in Islip, in Shirley Mastic area, and in Oakdale, where we're going to be expending hundreds of millions of dollars to hook people up to sewers. That's going to make a huge difference in terms of pulling contaminants out of the water. But the others need to be addressed as well. There are many, many places where it's not practical, possible, or within the political will to move on to sewers. And in those places, we have people like Justin Jobin, who's the wonderful project manager for Suffolk County's septic improvement program that's been called Reclaim Our Water, who have helped with the development of technologies that you can put in your private residences that'll pull the nitrogen out of the water. So we have programs in place both at the county level, town of Southampton, town of East Hampton, and the town of Shelter Island are using their CPF funds to assist homeowners in the financial burden of upgrading to these systems. The technology is in place. It continues to be developed. We now have a regulatory structure that allows for these new technologies. We did the first sanitary code revisions in 30 years in order to put together the regulatory mechanism to allow these systems to be installed, and have made a number of amendments to that since that time. We're moving at, it seems like a snail's pace, but we are moving at a really rapid pace considering the amount of effort that we're being able, the amount of progress we're being able to achieve. We originally started at the county with $2 million a year to expend on these systems, and because of the robust nature of the work that Justin and his colleagues are doing, the state agreed to fund our program with 60% of state funds available statewide for septic improvement. So there's a $75 million program over 5 years to be, originally it was to spend $15 million throughout the entire state, and they gave Suffolk County $10.2 million of that. And we've got it re-upped again for next year. So we need your cooperation to get these systems in place. We're doing everything we can to move forward. And now it's really up to us to assist homeowners, and it's up to homeowners to embrace the technologies and the resources that are available to you to help you move forward, because it's a very critical issue.
Thank you, Bridget. So that segues nicely into Justin, obviously. Justin, one of the biggest pushes in Suffolk County's program to reduce nitrogen in our aquifers and waterways is incentivizing homeowners to install advanced wastewater treatment systems. Can you speak to how successful these new systems are in removing nitrogen from wastewater? And what are some of the pros and cons of having one of these new systems?
Great. Thank you, Gavin, for having me today. I want to start by saying that the county's worked on piloting systems and testing them in Suffolk County so that we do know that these systems do remove nitrogen and are being successful removing nitrogen. We have 6 technologies currently approved, and we do incentivize these systems through a grant and loan program. We have a county grant of up to $20,000 and a state grant of up to $10,000, so residents can apply for up to $30,000 in funding to put in a system that averages about $22,000. So that's the incentive that's in place. We have 6 technologies that have proven the ability to reduce nitrogen to 19 milligrams per liter, which represents a 70% reduction in total nitrogen. They're successful at doing that. They're modular systems, so they're relatively easy to put in the ground. And really, to speak about pros and cons, I'm hard-pressed to come up with a con because I'm so involved with these systems, but I do want to mention that the term that we use for these systems is called Innovative and Alternative On-Site Wastewater Treatment System, or IAs. And to me, the problem with that, I've been around these systems for almost 20 years now. I've been working with these systems for 19 years in New England, and I came out to Suffolk County in 2015 to work on the program here. And these systems, to me, are not innovative or new or experimental. They are the norm and should be the norm in places like Suffolk County. So I think that the con is probably in the name and getting it accepted throughout the county. The pros of these systems is very clear. It reduces nitrogen. It does so relatively inexpensively compared to sewering. It does so in areas that aren't feasible for sewers, and we have multiple different technologies. Each have their benefits. We have technologies that weigh as little as 450 pounds, so you can get them into backyards. We have technologies that are heavy concrete technologies that can withstand high groundwater tables. We have multiple options, many tools in the toolbox, so there are many pros to having these systems. And there are costs associated with these systems. There are operation and maintenance costs, and there are electrical costs. The operation and maintenance costs can be up to $300 to $400 a year on the high end, and the electrical costs range between $70 a year and $270 a year. So those would be considered cons because there are long-term costs. However, the cost of these systems, operating these systems on an annual basis, is less than most sewer fees that are around $700 to $800. So keep that in mind. If these systems cost $400 to $500 a year to operate, it's still much less than sewer connection fees. So there's that. So one of the things that we've experienced in this program, and we've installed as part of the septic improvement program over 83 systems. We have 106 systems ready to go in the ground. We have 400 people in the pipeline and another 400 applications that are ready to be processed. So we have a lot of interest. Just in the last month, we've had over 70 applicants, which has been huge. And what we see from pushback and some of the cons is some of the time that it takes to get the grant, to go through the engineering process, and also the disruption to the yard and sprinkler systems. And Long Islanders love the nice green grass here. And to put a system in the ground, you have to obviously dig up your yard and do some disruption. So that's been one of the problems, is that we're trying to get systems in the ground in a really narrow time frame because we want them in by the summertime and we want them in the spring and fall. So there's been a rush right now, and that's one of the cons, is trying to get all the systems in the ground in the time frame that we have. So I think that handles the question, and that's it.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure there'll be more to come on that issue.
And I do have brochures up here if anyone's interested, and I have a few business cards if anyone's interested in that.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, your environmental group has petitioned Suffolk County to ban the use of methoprene, a pesticide used to control its mosquito population. Can you talk about the impacts pesticides like this are having on the environment, and what local governments and homeowners can do better to protect local water quality?
Thank you, Gavin. Good afternoon, everyone. You mentioned, I'll say, the change on the East End with respect to suburbanization. And I certainly have seen the increase in pesticide applications, the insecticides and herbicides for residential landscaping. On the institutional scale, Suffolk County deploys a product called methoprene following tidal cycles roughly every 2 weeks. 20,000 acres of salt marsh are routinely sprayed in the warm weather months to combat the mosquito larvae. Methoprene, the science around this is quite substantial as to the impacts to non-target insects as well as crustaceans, or lobsters, crabs, and shrimp. Any salt marsh will have a host of biological life out there. Ultimately, methoprene disrupts that development into the flying stage. I've been addressing environmental review at Suffolk County for over 15 years and, again, have great concerns about the continued use of methoprene. The other jurisdictions locally, I'll say within our region, the state of Connecticut in 2013 banned methoprene use in the entire coastal zone. Rhode Island has restrictions around its use in Narragansett Bay, New York City, and Jamaica Bay. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on coastal refuges on the Pacific side. So there's a recognition of the collateral damages. The studies that I cited, one in particular, looked at a salt marsh in the Midwest over 3 years of methoprene applications and saw a significant reduction in non-target insects. I don't know if you saw the New York Times piece several months back, the insect apocalypse. It talks about the significant decline in insects, which has serious ecological ramifications. We've got to be really cognizant, I think, on an institutional scale. Suffolk County needs to really revisit methoprene applications when there's an alternative that is benign. BTI is a product used by these other jurisdictions that I cited. My group has been supportive of restricted use of methoprene should West Nile virus appear in a mosquito pool around a specific marsh area. Again, a limited application to combat and control disease that may exist. So there are options. The collateral damages are significant. And again, in this day and age, we've really got to back off of pesticide applications.
Thank you, Kevin. Bob, in addition to habitat restoration work and education in local schools, the group for the East End has put considerable resources into advocating against the overdevelopment of the East End. What development projects is the group currently focused on?
Good question. First, again, my thanks to the Express, and thanks to all of you, because any of us who work in the civic advocacy field, there's 3 people here that do this. We are nothing without the voice of individuals like yourselves who show up, who respond to our mailings, who put those letters in. Democracy still works at the local level, and I think all of us who do this, have seen how things can actually happen, which is one of the reasons we work locally. So I thank all of you for coming and spending some time with us. On the issue of, when the organization was founded, when the group was founded in 1972, one of the goals was to have a professional response to what people perceived as kind of a one-way ticket to the destruction of the region, which was, and you see it to this day. I mean, the planning boards and zoning boards are overwhelmed by developers and other consultants, and the goal was to have somebody who could respond back when those projects came in the door. So there's a lot of ways that happens, and you mentioned it earlier, so maybe I'll take that project first. A couple of miles from here is a sand mine, and sand mines historically in this region were opened long before zoning, and they dug a lot of sand, and they sold a lot of sand for everything from building the Sunrise Highway to making concrete. And over time, we realized that much of the sand that they were digging was coming out of areas that were also the best areas for our groundwater that we drink. And so there's an inherent conflict there. Over the years, and again, this particular mine up the road, the Wainscott Sand and Gravel Mine, is in an area that's been designated by the local government as an Aquifer Protection Overlay District, by the county as a critical environmental area, and by the state of New York as a special groundwater protection area. You can think of the area around the New York City reservoir system as how important that is. And it's got an industrial use on top of it, which now under zoning is considered a non-conforming use. You couldn't get it today. So for a number of years, the mine, according to the state, was running out of sand, and an issue emerged where, in addition to mining sand, and they're not alone in this, by the way, a lot of these facilities start to do other activities. In this particular case, there was a major mulching operation, and all of us should think about where all the trees and things that we either cut down or see cut down end up, because we are actually part of the supply system that puts in all of these materials into areas like an open sand mine. where they get ground up, and over time they leach into the groundwater, and there are contaminants, heavy metals, and other things that have been found. So the short story here is on this project, which was essentially at the end of its life, the Suffolk County Health Department, based on legislation from Suffolk County, was able to go in and take a look around. And what they were able to find was that there is significant contamination of that aquifer. And when I say significant, I mean heavy metal numbers over 200 times the drinking water standard. So we're not messing around here with some of these things. Radiation, nitrates at double the drinking water standard. Not exactly what you want to have in your drinking water area. So we began to work with others, and I see Elena Loretto is here from the Noack Civic Council, and April Gornick, and some other folks who basically came together and said, look, this has got to stop. At some point, this pre-existing non-conforming use is out of sand, and we have to find a way to try to protect the aquifer. And not surprisingly, the guys who run the mine want to keep running the mine. But the DEC is the regulatory agency that's supposed to be the arbiter of what you can and can't do. And there has been a push and pull for the last 5 or 6 years to get the state to sort of call the ball and decide what's the right thing to do on that property. And I have to tell you, in my many years of doing this, for whatever reason, the state of New York has kind of taken a pass. And that's dangerous when it comes to sand mines, because the DEC is the primary agency responsible for whether or not you can or can't have a sand mine. So we're engaged now in a number of different things, from primary direct advocacy to the agency to try to have them rethink their position, to litigation that's been filed in the last week. And this, by the way, is something you should know. There are 13 petitioners in this litigation, all on the same lawsuit, which include the town of Southampton and Noack Civic Council and Group for the East End and individual homeowners and other organizations, civic and environmental. I don't know that I've seen a pileup of petitioners like that trying to get the court's attention. The bottom line is you have to do all of these things to protect these resources. They don't protect themselves, and this region suffers from the death of 1,000 cuts. Very rarely do we have a giant factory with a belching pipe that you can simply, put out of business. We have the slow drip, drip, drip of contamination and pollution, and whether it's from septics or whether it's from development projects, they're all affecting our water supply. So that's one project, one example. There's many more, and I'll leave it there. But I welcome all of your questions later on about anything specific that may be on your mind, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Bob. Laura, Concerned Citizens of Montauk has partnered with the towns as well as the Group for the East End to get word out on the rebate programs for these new septic systems. Can you explain how important you believe these systems are in the effort to improve water quality on the East End? And can you detail some of the financial assistance available for homeowners?
Sure. Thank you, Gavin, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. I do want to mention that, yes, Concerned Citizens of Montauk has been spearheading several public meetings in cooperation with Bob from the Group for the East End, but also Adrian Esposito with Citizens Campaign for the Environment. So we have actually been tasked by the county, using some county resources, but also pooling our own, to help get the word out on a regional basis about the need to change out these systems and to inform homeowners about the financial assistance available to essentially cover the cost, almost the full cost for these installations. So these septic meetings, I do want to mention, we've had actually, and I do want to acknowledge Kate Rossi Snook from CCOM in the room, so raise your hand. She is working with me on these. We've done several in Montauk, and they've always been standing room only, very well attended. Recently, we just held one on Monday in Southampton, which was also standing room only in the town boardroom. And we have one coming up on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, April 30th at East Hampton Town Hall at 6 p.m. So what we try to do is we try to bring together people from the town who implement these programs, look at your applications. We always have Justin from the county talking about the county program and assistance available, but we also are going to have the septic vendors there. So all the approved systems that Justin mentioned, they are there with models or installation demos to tell you about the types of installations they do and where their installations make the most sense. So it's the outreach we're doing. We're reaching a lot of people, and it's a really great opportunity. So I encourage you to come to the East Hampton meeting on 30th. But I just want to mention that a lot of us have been involved in and funded science and scientific studies of our waterways all over Long Island, and time again, science has shown that the nitrogen in our groundwater, our drinking water, and our surface waters are coming from a variety of sources, whether it's atmospheric deposition, fertilizers, but the majority is coming from wastewater, and that's because of the septic systems we have. And these septic systems, yes, some are really old and not functioning at all, but some systems are actually sort of newer, but they were just never designed to treat waste. They were designed to treat waste, never to treat nitrogen. So we have, I think it's 360,000 septic systems, thank you, in Suffolk County, and they're continually, just like Bob said, dripping nitrogen into our drinking water, our surface waters. And what we have now, and what we're seeing a lot more with climate change, is a rising groundwater table. So some of these systems are literally sitting in groundwater, and so they're not functioning at all. And it's a direct conduit to our surface waters. So we do have science that tells us where this nitrogen is coming from. And I do have to commend both the county, the state, and the towns for identifying and realizing that the science doesn't lie. Science doesn't lie. And they are putting the money where the problem is. So there are multiple different types of funding sources to fund these systems. The county developed theirs first, and they actually, it's being funded by state money as well. And then we have the towns. We have 3 towns in Suffolk County, all on East End, who have the Community Preservation Fund and have decided to allocate some of the CPF water quality money to fund these septic replacements. And that will be the town of Shelter Island, the town of East Hampton, and the town of Southampton. So it's interesting trying to be kind of the point of knowing all these different programs, because every program has different eligibility requirements. Every program has different types of activities they'll cover versus, if it's maintenance, if it's landscaping, if it's the actual cost of the vendor. And then all these different programs fund up to different amounts of money too. So it makes it a little confusing, but I think the programs actually work together on a daily basis and work together very well, and are trying to, I think we're trying to consolidate some of the application processes to make it a little simpler and easier, so that it can kind of just be like a one-stop shop instead of having to go to 2 different municipalities at the same time to apply for funding. So I do have, I think we have some county pamphlets that talk about the programs, but we kind of on a daily basis have to know what these other programs have. So if there may be other questions about what these other town and county programs do. But essentially what's really great about the town and county programs is whether or not each individual one can cover the full cost, likely you'll be able to go after both and have the entire process covered, whether it's a grant rebate or even through additional financing at very low interest rates. That's also available. So I think I'll leave it at that. We could spend hours, but April 30th, 6 p.m. East Hampton Town Hall.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Robbie, when we think of water quality, we usually think of nitrogen, pollutants, and establishing environments like wetlands. But over the years, you've talked a lot about engineered and upland solutions that also need planning. What are some examples of this aspect of water quality protection?
Okay, actually, when I looked at that question, which I got beforehand, I thought I was going to talk about just the structures that can be done. Like for example, when we're looking at building parking lots now, we put in rain gardens, those sort of things. But funny thing happened to me this morning is sat down at the breakfast table, and there was my wife was writing a book that's based in the West, and she was doing research, and she had a book that was printed in 1975 on the geomorphology of conservation. And so I started to thumb through it, and all the same issues are there. There's not one that is different. And then I started to think, well, and there's a whole series of thing on coastal. And then I started to think, well, the geomorphology is, if in psychoanalysis or in psychology, there's a dictum which says there's nothing that isn't systemic. Everything is interconnected. So to pick up what other people are saying. So the fact of the matter is that as we build, we create runoff, we create really structures that obstruct the natural processes. In Long Beach, for example, which was one short beach that went through, we're actually, and probably Kevin and Bob can talk to this better than I can, we're actually in the exact same configuration at the upper coves in Sag Harbor that had the inversion that Riverhead had. It would not be unusual to think that we could have a massive bunker run in here someday that could just have a kill off, that we would have a fish kill that we would be unable to eradicate for years. Not unlike what happened in that peak in the 50s. And we're getting closer and closer to that in terms of oxygen inversions, what's going on. So we have to, I started thinking about the structures is the whole environment. We're no longer just coastal. We're an environment of structure that affects the coastal. We have farmlands now that have shrunk, that used to be able to absorb in a slower rate into the groundwater. Now they're just running off. The topsoil is running off. It's running into the roads. What's happening in Sagaponic is happening in Sag Harbor because it goes down from here. The plume that was created of the septics we're talking about has been moving for 50, 60 years. When I was a child, everyone fished off the bridge. That's not happening anymore. You know, it's not just the scallops that left. So we need to undo hard structures and think upland in a way. When houses are sold, I think we need to talk about how water is contained. We do that now in the ZBA. It's not just the simple solutions like semi-pervious semi-pervious driveways and so on that will, you know, let water run into the ground. It's what's also running off. So the main thing that I would think about right now is in Sag Harbor is how do we undo part of what happened in Long Beach? Because flushing systems really makes a big, big difference. That's part of what helped the Great South Bay. It's part of what helped Mecox. We know we used to let in Georgia. We need to think about that here, right now. The other structure that I think that Sag Harbor often gets talked about is the sewer plant itself, which is right on the water. And, you know, though maligned, it actually has a better nitrogen rate than the groundwater, than the county water. You know, it's 0.4, and I think the county water is now 0.6 or something. It's like, or maybe it's 3.75 now. But so the water you drink is really no different than what's going out of the sewer plant. So we need to look at really what happens when we're building, where that water is going. It's not just, you know, and then we also have to, on top of that, look at stormwater management, because these things, because of all the structures we built, are just flooding and destroying our wetlands. So that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you, Robbie. That was just a little food for thought to get things started. I'm going to turn the program over to Brian, and if you have any questions or comments, just give us your name and please speak into the microphone. Brian?
Thanks. Folks, this is your time, your conversation. We welcome your thoughts, your questions, your comments. We have a great panel up here. Who'd like to offer a question? Unfortunately not. Barry is not here, who usually starts us off. I see Jean Held has her hand up. Two of you. Who do we want to start with? Yes, absolutely. Are you going to do this in harmony?
I'm just going to introduce Jean, okay?
That's fine.
All right, and ourselves. We're Friends of Havens Beach, and which is an organization which I hope you'll all join. And I kind of think Robbie Stein just led us into the discussion, because Havens Beach is, as you may know, was a gift to the village of Sag Harbor almost 100 years ago from Lila Havens, and it's a great jewel of Sag Harbor. It's our only swimming beach, and it's 20 acres behind it, but potentially could be very important acres in our future. And we've got, well, I'll let Jean take it from here. She's got the samples.
Well, yes. Number one, there's a long tradition of learning how to swim. Oh, okay. Well, I forget which one is which. And you will have to remind me. Okay. There is a long tradition of children learning how to swim at Havens Beach. And in fact, I've met 3 generations down there just a week ago, and it was very heartwarming. But unfortunately, since the dredge of 2017, there's some conditions down there which make it less appealing. And I will say there's one thing about it. If you take a walk down there, you will find it's different on every single day, depending on the weather, the tide, and I would say the wind. And many times conditions like this are covered over with a layer of sand, so you don't know it until you step in it and sink. And I find that there is a certain amount of danger down there in some of the places. I see a couple of heads nodding, so maybe someone stepped in it too. But I have lost my balance several times. I'm just going to show you some more. This is sand from the top of the beach, which it looks gray now, but if you add water to it, it turns to this, as opposed to the yellow sand that we used to have. Now, what I'm going to ask the panel if you have any solutions for this. We were told it might wash away. Well, wash away, it isn't doing. And where is it going to wash to? That's my first concern, is what can we do to clean up the conditions of the sludge that are there now. The second one, we have been told there is a plan to enlarge the entry pipe to the drain that already leads down into the water. Now, if you go down and you take a walk at the end of the drain at the bay, you're going to find a delta, and that sand too is soft, and you can sink into that, meaning that it is eroding the land. Now, if we add more water with a larger pipe, what is that going to do? So, of course, there are solutions to catch it, which have been mentioned by the board, up on the uplands in the drainage area, and I certainly would encourage that rather than bringing more water down to the beach. And I think people are unaware that there are 3 drains actually going into the Havens Beach water. One you have at Cor Maria, and one that goes directly off the parking lot. And you know what's in parking lots, right? Now, where that drain is right now is on the west side of the beach, where there is a strip of land which could be turned into a beautiful demonstration for the village rain garden. Perfect. You know, the village has a list of wetland plants. Let's use that list as a demonstration and not have the water draining directly. Now, so we have those 2 drains plus the one that we call our drain. Okay. Now that's. Oh, yeah. Well, somebody's going to have to correct me. It's about 150 acres coming into the drain from drainage area. Will anybody correct that?
That's approximately correct.
Did
Okay.
you finish?
No. Well, in a way, yes, because we did talk about the drain, the possibility of bringing down a rain garden there. So, would you like that?
Well, Blair here just wanted to make clear so that you understand what happened, because perhaps not everybody does, that when the harbor was dredged right next to Long Wharf, the decision was made, we really don't know by whom, to put the dredge spoil directly onto the beach. As far as I know, this has never been done before, and we do want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
We have several people, I think, equipped to field some of those questions. Robbie, we want to start with you.
I don't know if I'm equipped, but 2 things. I think, Kevin, you were involved with me in this in the beginning. I never was for the cut. I was never for that cut. What should have happened and should still happen when we did the original studies was that there should have been an S kind of meandering where it came through and a partial filter. And that would have stopped the rush that's there that created that. I don't think a rain garden will do it, frankly. Yeah, yeah, sorry. But going upland, you need lots of rain gardens to stop what that's happening. I mean, the whole, again, systemic concept. When, you know, I go to a lake in Wisconsin, which is literally the most pristine lake in the Midwest. And all of the lakes had an advantage that we didn't have, which was when the acid rain happened and things began to get polluted, there's no tide. Didn't make it better, sort of. Didn't make it look better, you know, even in the sense of Havens Beach. As you said, some days it looks fine. If you look at it, it looks fine. The lakes didn't come back. So they've had 30, 40, 50 years to deal with this because they had to see it. So they stopped, you know, the zebra mussels, they stopped boats going in, and the lakes have come back. We're with a much larger body. So the first thing is that. The second part of it is, I don't know the answer to what happened with the dredge. I think the DEC determined it could go there, but I'm not sure. I think there had to be an agreement with the village, but it was not when I was on the board. Pardon?
Kevin?
I think you're right. I think DEC has to give the permit.
Right.
The county did probably get the dredging.
Yeah, the county did the dredging, so it was, you know, and we had guarantees at the time that it would be filtered and so on. So. No, I understand, but I'm not neither an environmental scientist or a geomorphologist, so I have to pass it on.
I'd actually also like to point out that it's not just a water quality and sediment quality issue. You know, I live in Sag Harbor too, and I will not bring my 2-year-old daughter to Havens Beach ever. I don't feel comfortable doing it. It's a safety issue too, because what we've been finding is like sharp metal pieces also that are coming up from that. So I think that's also a concern, at least that I have as well, is that these metal shards would seriously like puncture my little girl's feet and could cause some serious damage too. So I wish I had a solution, but I'm with you.
I mean, just a couple of ideas, and again, this is sort of big picture, but along with what Robbie said, looking at the inflow as opposed to the outflow is sometimes the most helpful thing you can do, because once that water is on its way, even if you set up thrust blocks and riprap and a variety of other things, the torrent of water that comes is just too strong. So, and again, this is a little academic only because I don't know the boundaries of the watershed, but the bottom line is we have to start thinking at the beginning of the process, and stormwater engineering for many years has focused on the end of the process. So once the torrent is on its way, we try to find ways to slow it down or to block it or what have you. And I think the next generation of, I'm sorry, turning back, you know, the next generation of management really is looking systemically at where it's coming from in the first place. And again, getting back to us in terms of how many driveways do we have to have and how much sheet runoff from our front lawn, which is heavily irrigated, you know, do we have to have? We do bear some responsibility, the collective we, about how we're managing our own properties. And that's an important message for people in this room to share, because we always kind of say, why don't they, you know, they should do well, the they is us, right? At the end of the day, we have to start thinking differently. So one thing is, again, start at the beginning. The second thing is where you do have space and you do have physical area to work in, the construction of a rain garden or a detention area or some place where the slowed water can settle out does you a lot of favors in a lot of ways. You settle out bacteria, keeps the bacteria out of the water. The fines have a chance to filter out so they don't end up in your dredge spoil that 20 years later is thrown up on the beach. So those little sort of impoundments that have vegetation in them, just like a natural wetland, do a tremendous amount of good. And if there's an opportunity for that, I would definitely recommend it. Now, the hardest question that you pose is what do you do with the stuff that got dredged up from the metal shavings to the fines that nobody wants to step in because your instincts tell you this is gross and you don't want to do it? I don't know. What I do know is that, you know, what you're looking at is evidence of decades of uncontained runoff, carrying silts and fines, essentially reliberated back into the environment. And sadly, and maybe Kevin, and I hope Kevin has more on this maybe, you know, a lot of times you have to let it work its way through and out, and I don't know how long that will take, and I don't know if it can happen, but maybe the message here, and it's kind of a sad one, is sometimes you break stuff, you can't put it back together again, and we live in a world that tells us we can engineer our way out of just about anything, but sometimes those examples are truly the effect over time of what we've done. You know, like if you don't take care of your health for your entire life, you have some stuff you can't fix. And I'll leave it there. And
Kevin, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, please. First, I'd like to address the dredging. For starters, Havens Beach is a popular bathing beach or bay beach. The sediments that are deposited there naturally through marine processes are coarse sands. The dredge cut adjacent to Long Wharf, apparently they went deeper than normal. So looking at the industrial use of that area, we were probably getting into some funky stuff, as certainly described, particularly oils and fuel drippings. Likely the sediments are finer. I have seen them myself. I know there was a great deal of stone material. My recommendation would be regular screening of that bathing area to periodically remove the heavier material and shards. The tilling itself through sun exposure could break down some of the contaminants. So short of removing and scraping out that material and disposing of it landwide, we're just going to have to wait for this to play out over time, and that can be managed with the tilling. The ditch itself, I've been intimate with Havens Ditch for many years. I would urge that that ditch be managed. There was some discussion about removing Phragmites. There's real benefit to that vegetation taking up nutrients and sediments. If in fact they're going to increase the flow into that ditch, that has to be managed properly, and continuous maintenance of the technology at the discharge end, a filter that ultimately would remove oils, bacterial contamination. So it requires regular attention, and I think we can make improvements in that area. Thank you.
We're just from a historic perspective, we're only just about 50 years from them actually requiring the village of Sag Harbor to have a sewer system in the first place. Up until that point, raw sewage ran from Boulevard or downtown right into outflows right into the harbor, which is one reason that nobody who grew up in Sag Harbor ever ate anything that came out of the harbor or the cove. There was also a period where they had discussed an artificial wetlands, and Kevin, I think you probably remember that. Probably about 20 years ago, there was a discussion about installing it. The village decided that they would be better able to control it with a Fike system, I think, to control water runoff. That's kind of where we were. Pierce, did you want to weigh in on this at all? I think that maybe you have a perspective. Okay, I will do that. Yes. Simon? Just identify yourself, if you would.
My name is Simon Harrison. I'm a real estate broker. And I wrote some notes down just so I could try and be clear. I really like that statement, they is us. After 30 years of showing waterfronts of all kinds and walking on docks weekly, if not daily, it would be nice to see the bottom of the bay more than occasionally. In addition to being accused of being a real estate broker, I've also been accused of being a clean water advocate. And I read one of Gobler's studies where they looked at the nitrogen loading that's in the bays, and they carbon dated some of the nitrogen that came from sanitary systems to 19 years. That basically means that our bays and our coves and our harbors are backed up. And whatever we do to address the sewage that goes in there, it's still going to get to the tidal reach where all water is connected. This speaks to three things. Again, all water is connected. That means the rivers, the streams, and the sprinkler systems are drinking water and the tidal reach. If some of you guys could speak to the need for bayscaping to address treating tidal wetlands, I would like to offer up a thought that the area inside the bridge be turned into a marine reserve, because there's a fair amount of scallop dredging, which wrecks the eelgrass systems and doesn't allow fish nurseries to propagate and to expand. And I think oysters and clams should be encouraged to clean the water as it exists rather than 19 years down the road.
Let's see, who can feel that question? Bob, maybe?
I agree. With much of what you said, you know, this is the problem, that we have an integrated circulatory system, that's the water, and depending on what happens to that circulatory system, these messes get made and are difficult to clean up for sure. With respect to, like, what do we do inside, you know, in terms of marine sanctuaries, all I can tell you is this is clearly a political issue as much as it's an ecological issue. The term marine sanctuary,
Marine Reserve, I think I said.
Marine Reserve, what it does is it creates an immediate backlash among people in the fishing business. And this issue has come up time and again. It doesn't mean that it can't change. I just want to identify that obstacle, because telling, you know, and it's an irony that we sort of we put scallops in a box and we grow them in the box and then we throw them in the bay and then we collect them like an Easter egg hunt. And it's, you know, sort of, it's kind of a substitute for getting the scallops to grow on their own. And we have to do better, but we also have to change the language. We have to start to change the language to get away from the stuff that causes people to immediately react. And I would argue, on the social science side of this, that discussion is going to have to precede the actual science of getting the job done. And it's often a shortcut for guys like us to say, listen, we know what we have to do. Let's just do that. But you don't realize that the words that you use in saying what that is freaks people out, and you can lose 10 years in the process. So my only humble contribution is we got to make sure, if we're going to do something like that, we got to make sure we get the language right. We got to make sure that we get the stakeholders to understand what we're talking about before the message goes live, so that you don't have that natural reaction. And we need to spend a tremendous amount of time with elected officials who would be involved in making such a designation to make sure that they feel enough protection and comfort and stakeholder support so that they will feel the urgency to act. And I know that none of that sounds like you're actually fixing the problem, but what I've learned in this business is that front loading of all of those difficult pieces is where you have to start. Because all of us think everything needs to be done yesterday, and especially if you're in this business. But all of those other psychosocial pieces have to be part of it. And I'll leave that comment because yep.
Surely you're not saying that bayscaping and establishing more marine reserves is a third rail topic.
No. Actually, I'm sorry, on the bayscaping, and you're right, I should have mentioned that. So bayscaping, right? So we've been actually involved, and you guys have been involved in the Peconic Estuary program has made a 20-year effort to kind of, in fact, I have some bayscaping brochures in my backpack. That's it's a perfect example. I should have used it. That's an example of where the language came to be seen as a positive. And once people understood bayscaping, that sounds like something you want to do. And it can be done, and it is being done, and it's being done on a voluntary basis. More boards and zoning boards and planning boards are requiring things like native plantings and so forth, and they work, and they don't require a lot of fertilizing. So you're helping me, thank you, to kind of make the point that getting the language down and getting the language to work gets the job done. Bayscaping, I think, is an example of where that's happened. But I can also tell you it took a long time. I mean, those words, you wouldn't have heard anybody say bayscaping in this room 15 years ago. So I'm glad that's happening. So.
I just wanted to offer up a thought that I'm not an enemy of commercial fishermen. I have them in my family.
Yeah, no, listen.
We'll still share Thanksgiving dinner. I think that they're a part of the solution and not part of the problem. But some of the practices, like using mowers and scallop trails, is in fact adding to the problem when with slight adjustments it could improve the problem on the other side to address it from more than one
Right. And then you got to get them comfortable enough at that dinner table to have that conversation. Because that's where it starts.
Robbie, you want to?
Yeah, it also starts with education and perception. I mean, the story I like telling is when we used to drive out here when I was a small child, we all threw the garbage out of the cars because you wanted to keep the cars clean. You didn't think, no one thought littering was a problem. And then it began to take on a different look. It's almost like we need to engage the artists and creative people here, or have you, to bring your daughter to the forefront, because, we're sitting here, but we need really younger activists because they're what makes change. So I think education is a big part of this, starting early.
Okay. Laura? Sure.
So I just want to make one point on the shellfish sanctuary idea. Shellfish are great for many reasons. They also serve as a great nutrient sink. They filter our water, but just the existence of them in the ecosystem is great. Yes, the idea of sanctuaries or reserves scares a lot of people, and we've always, anytime that word comes out of our mouth, I think in the last 15 years, we've all kind of just gotten the eyes. But one concept which is kind of flourishing that you probably are aware of is that there are certain areas that are closed to shellfishing, either administratively or because they don't meet the current SA shellfishing water standards. Right. So there is an effort to create either aquaculture on or off bottom, or even create sanctuaries, and they do call them sanctuaries, in these closed waters because it's illegal to take the shellfish from those waters. So there is, and I think it's something where we're all trying to promote now and starting to work on, us in Montauk too especially, is there are areas that we know they're not going to be taken and disturbed, but yet they're going to filter our water and they're going to serve several ecosystem purposes. So that is something that we should really look at.
Thank you. Kevin, you wanted to add something?
On the biofiltration, Simon, you're right on point. You used the term basecaping. I would like to emphasize with sea level rise and its projections over the next several decades, the expansion and migration of these wetlands landward is in fact happening. So we have to be very cognizant that we're not pinching off the backside, encapsulating wetlands where they can't migrate and do their job as biofilters. On the receiving end with the coves, Laura brought up the closures, and that's unfortunate. We've got to change that policy at a DEC level to allow sanctuaries and grow out for the purpose of just in perpetuity filtering. And I would urge, and I know this is the case with one of the more recent developments within the village, to establish sanctuaries and artificial reefs, shellfish reefs that will contribute to water quality improvements. And we need to do this on a large scale.
Thanks. And I just wanted to jump back to Bridget to give her an opportunity to explain the county's perspective on the dredging that took place at Havens Beach.
Well, I can't give the whole county's perspective, but just on the wetlands issue, I did want to just point out that we are very aware of the concerns with regard to the survival of the wetlands and the migration of the wetlands. And as a matter of fact, I just advocated successfully to get included in every contract and deed for open space acquisition in the county language that will allow, as techniques develop to allow the migration of wetlands, we want to make sure that we have the flexibility. This is particularly important in places just west of us, like the Mastic-Shirley area, that we have the ability to do whatever it is that we need to do to maintain the natural systems there and not be too restricted with regard to structures. There's a lot going on in Maryland and elsewhere, probably up in Rhode Island as well, as we watch what climate change is doing at an alarming pace to our wetland system. So we're trying to keep an eye on that.
Thanks, Bridget.
With regard to the dredging, I didn't think, since I'm sitting up here as a county representative, Justin probably doesn't know anything about it. One of us needs to answer for that. I can say that the village officials did approach us and say that it was a critically important thing to get that dredging done. We've had this conversation, partly because it was becoming difficult. I experienced it myself, navigating under the bridge, in particular, that hadn't been dredged in a very long time, that channel. Anyway, so I was told, we learned about the concerns after a year after the private consultant had been brought on board to do the dredging in the Sag Harbor. There's a lot of dredging, as you can imagine, 900 square miles of Suffolk County. So, and out east here, we often have private consultants that work for the county to do it. So that is what happened. They worked in conjunction with the DEC. identified the soils. There was soil testing that was done by the DEC there, and we've talked about this. And my understanding, after asking a lot of questions of the county dredge program, is that from the perspective of ecological resource management, they want to deposit the spoils as close to where they are collected as possible to maintain the ecosystem. This is what I'm told. I'm not a scientist. And so that's one of the reasons. They have done some filtering, and I appreciate Kevin's observation. This is a dynamic system, and over time there will be changes. One hopes will be positive changes as the ecosystem, defends itself. But I've also requested additional screening. But the problem was brought to our attention after that contract period had passed. So the private contractor to do the screening is not available. So we have to identify funding. And I'm not sure that the village officials are on board with that. So we've got to work out how we could do additional screening to let the natural processes work.
Thanks, Bridget.
The shellfish spawner sanctuaries are an excellent move to help with water quality and enhance the natural populations of shellfish for water quality improvement and to ensure that our baymen can keep being baymen. But also what Bob was saying is we have to also change our behavior. We cannot rely on the concept of let's just throw more shellfish in the water. Como supported that. It's fantastic. The Suffolk County lease program for oyster farmers to start up, fantastic. But we also, all of us, have to change our behavior. That's all.
Thank you. Elena, I see you have a question, your hand up. I'll be right back to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Elena Loretto, president of the Noyac Civic Council. We've been very active with Bob, Adrienne Esposito and her group, Citizens for the Citizens for the Environment, certainly Save Sag Harbor with April, and many groups that are opposing the latest DEC shenanigans, okay? As you know, they did a reversal. In September, they were telling the Sandland mine, you have no more sand, and because of all the vegetative processing that took place there, we're going to shut you down. In 2 weeks, you are to stop everything and start reclaiming the mine. Well, of course, we celebrated. We thought, all right, this is good. The DEC is finally looking out for our water. And then sure enough, in March, they had a wonderful press release where they said, we have a program to shut the mine. However, we will allow the mine to continue to contaminate our water for another 8 years. And that same mine in September that didn't have sand, all of a sudden can go 40 feet deeper to mine sand. Now, I don't know what kind of magic wand that mine has to all of a sudden have all this extra sand. But what I'm trying to ask all of you is that we cannot rely on just Bob DeLuca, Bridget, Fred Thiel, everyone on that panel, but we can do something. So I brought a petition that we have been circulating. There might be a guide, I don't know, it's Easter weekend, so. But the court allowed us to have an extra 2 weeks time for public comments as of yesterday. So, if you care to sign this petition on the way out, it would be absolutely wonderful. I have some extra copies if you feel like getting some of your neighbors to sign. Just give me your phone number so I can arrange to pick it up within the next 2 weeks. I sent a whole bunch of these yesterday, overnight, certified to the DEC. There were letters that I also sent in that envelope. But we need more signatures. I will read to you what the petition says. We, the undersigned, demand that the DEC hold a public hearing on the DEC's granting of a permit to the Sandland mine, a known polluter. In September of 2018, the DEC stopped the operations of the mine, citing the Suffolk County Health Department's report that found contaminants in our groundwater. These contaminants include carcinogens, pesticides, radioactive chemicals, excessive lead, iron, and other metals that were found in the aquifer beneath the mine. All of these were attributed because of the vegetative processing that took place there. So as they dig that sand out, guess what? These metals, chemicals, everything else are suddenly released and they drip down into our water. Wow, isn't that neat? Not really. Let me continue reading this. We demand an opportunity to voice our concerns and have our questions answered at a public forum immediately. The DEC is ignoring us, but we want a public hearing with the commissioner and Region 1 director there. We were fortunate enough in October of 2015 to have a public forum in Bridgehampton when we voiced our concerns when this mine wanted to expand. We want another public hearing. Please sign on your way out. I'll leave it at the table. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elena. Thank you. April, I think you had your hand up.
I was actually going to say we have till 3 p.m. today to get our messages into Cuomo, the commissioner of the DEC, and other elected officials, but we've got to, this is great that we have a 2-week extension. This is the first that I've heard of it. But yeah, Sandland has been utterly, it's been the most egregious example of unchecked pollution I've ever witnessed, certainly locally. So if you have the time, whether you sign the petition or not, I would certainly say definitely write to Governor Cuomo, definitely write to the commissioner of the DEC. It's not hard. You just Google Commissioner New York DEC and it'll come right up. And just write to people, however is easiest for you. If you can't write a letter and stick it in an envelope, although apparently that makes more of a difference. And to both Robbie's point and Bob's point, and Justin, I think, mentioned it too, just the whole thing of this is, when we say them really is us, and we've all encountered, I mean, everybody in this room is a concerned person or we wouldn't be in here, but we really do have to take matters into our own hands. And I just wanted to suggest, and if anyone wants to comment on this on the panel, that would be great, that you all take a look at a website called perfectearthproject.org. Perfect Earth Project is a project that was started by this woman named Edwina von Gall. She's a landscaper, and she's very concerned about the pollution that comes from the simplest things that most people are not aware of. Like when you fertilize your lawn, and then the fertilizer goes into the aquifer, it's filtered. Everything is filtered. We're all our own little ecosystems. So anyone that is a homeowner or renter and takes care of a lawn and can deal with runoff should check this out, because actually, if you do her Perfect Earth method, you let whatever pops into your lawn come up, which includes clover. Clover fixes nitrogen in your soil, and it makes for healthy root systems for everything in your yard. You want to just allow the grass to grow a little bit longer. It's very, very simple things. All of them save you money. You don't spend so much money on fertilizer. You don't mow your lawn as often. You leave your grass clippings. You don't have to pay somebody to pick them up. The whole thing makes everything easier. I've been doing my lawn like this for a really long time. It's fine, unless you hate clover and to see the occasional honeybee, which to me is like a joy at this point. You're gonna love this. It's really, really easy, and there's tons of free tips on this website. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know we're talking about water, but water is still impacted by land as we grow it, as we humans nurture it and grow it. So anybody wanna? I'm sorry, it's not like technical a question, but.
Can I just comment on something about that? I agree, April. I mean, I really do think everything, we're all our own ecosystems, and I think that's essential to understand. But there also are government and private partnerships that have to happen that encourage all of this. I mean, people talk about rain gardens. There are communities in this country that when a home is bought, if you plant a rain garden next to the road, you get a slight tax rebate. It makes a big difference. You know, what you stop running into the road. It drives me crazy looking at people's sprinkler systems when they're really watering the roads for hours. I mean, it's like, what? You know, then, and there are other areas where that can be done. I mean, I think the reality of Sag Harbor, and having been involved in local government for years, is that it has a very limited budget. So it's hard to give that kind of tax incentive. But we need to start thinking about, you know, what we're paying for and how we use it.
If you do this method, you've given yourself a discount. Everything is cheaper. So whether it's government encouraged by funding or rebates or whatever, you know, just it helps a really lot. And it's, you know, just I think thinking of all of us being part of it. I just read an article, I think it was in the Times, about how they're finding microparticles of plastic in remote mountain regions of the Pyrenees. I mean, really, humanity, this is what we've come down to, is that we're polluting every square inch of this globe. Everybody just has to, like, take responsibility as much as we possibly can to just start helping this. And it's all interconnected, the water, the land, it's, you know, it's all the same thing, I think.
April, I just wanted to mention Edwina Van Gaal is amazing. She's a great resource, even for us environmental organizations. She has dedicated staff who does education outreach. She has some really great resources. I believe Edwina is, if you don't want to call her office, or you're actually going to be able to speak to either her or her staff, East Hampton Town is hosting an Eco Day on Saturday, June 1st. I don't know the times. 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thank you, Kate. And Edwina will be there, but there's also going to be a lot of other environmental organizations who do similar work to Edwina. So I think that is a great opportunity to hear about other groups that do great work.
There's one other thing. This weekend, we should all know, Geek Hampton is doing a electronic recycling. They'll accept all your free electronics, used computer stuff, devices, batteries, electric toothbrushes, anything that you have that you shouldn't be throwing away because it adds heavy metals into the landfill, and they'll make sure it's disposed of properly. So I'm sorry to pitch them, but it's a big deal.
Bridget?
So two things. First of all, you just said Geek Hampton. It's completely off topic, but Geek Hampton is promoting the new trains, the 2 new trains that are coming in the mornings, and then there are 2 in the afternoon. I would encourage everyone to go on the Suffolk, it's called the South Fork Commuter Connection on the Long Island Railroad. We're doing everything we can to get people out of their cars. We want to reduce stormwater runoff. We want to reduce carbon emissions. We're going to reduce the terrible traffic on County Road 39. It's a great ride. I highly recommend it. We need to build it up. The more ridership we have, the more successful public transportation will be. It's a hard, hard lift out here, so please support the new trains. But I wanted to mention about, you mentioned, April, the Perfect Earth Project and Edwina Van Gaal. I'm really pleased to be involved with Edwina on a project to reduce pesticide use in Accabonac Harbor with regard to the black biting mosquitoes. And I just wanted to mention it because as we're talking about interconnectivity and our own personal responsibility for how we're using our natural resources, I'm blanking, Laura, my friend Laura Tumans, talked about her 2-year-old learning to swim in Havens Beach. I was aware of the stuff that's happened, and I didn't years ago have my son learn to swim in Havens Beach, but he did learn to swim in the Noyac Bay. And there was one moment when he was a toddler when a diamond terrapin hatchling swam up to him, and we together had this remarkable opportunity that I still count as one of the most important moments of his education, where we had to figure out what we wanted to do, and what he had wanted to do with this terrapin hatchling that he wanted to take home. And the South Fork Natural History Museum educators got on the phone with me and talked about it, and it was a great, great opportunity to recognize for all of us to raise another kid who understands that interconnectivity and how important every single member of our ecosystem is to supporting it and are supporting it together. Anyway, so we do have this concern about pesticide use throughout Suffolk County, especially where those black biting mosquitoes are so intense. And so we've engaged citizen scientists, including Edwina and the East Hampton Town trustees. And I have to say the vector control folks at the county have been very open to this new project, which I think is really reflective of the way government and we as a human society have to work, where we have partnerships with individuals, with academics, with citizen scientists, and with government to figure out how to make that interconnectivity work. So what we are doing is we go out into the marshes in Accabonac Harbor, and we actually dip for the larvae of the mosquitoes. We got a GPS app that was designed for the project that sends that information back to vector control, and then vector control can adjust where they need to apply pesticides. What it's done is last year 50% reduction in methoprene use. The acreage that they treated went from 190 acres to 70 acres, and out of 11 weeks, 4 weeks, they did not spray at all. So it's super exciting, but I just wanted to mention that as a great model for how we have to move forward. Our resources are increasingly limited in government, but people like yourselves, I'm so lucky because I represent the East End of Long Island, so there's so much understanding, but that's what we need, that continual education, the commitment and involvement of individual citizens, and not having just sort of this top-down county government that doesn't understand what we're like here in Peconic County.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. I do want to mention, for those of you who would like to petition the DEC regarding the sand land mine, they can contact, I will leave this, address to said letters is on noyac.org. Under action items, click Sandland, okay? noyac.org. You'll get the address for the DEC to petition them. I saw a hand up over here a moment ago. Yes.
Hello, Lily Fell, Sag Harbor. I have a question. I walked quite a bit through here, and I know we have, I believe it's 17 stormwater runoff drains that head to the bay. And Kevin, years ago, you made me aware of Abtec sponges. I know we have one in Havens Beach that's working, but it's tricky to change. I believe they've had issues with that. And I've read on the website these are installable in the stormwater drains. Is this something that you think is viable for the East End?
There's actually a couple of companies now that produce filter systems. I think they're appropriate at the end of pipes. You've heard some of the discussion that we really need to stem the flow of pesticides and other contaminants from their source. But ultimately, the applicability on discharge areas with these filters, I think it's an appropriate and necessary effort.
I'd like to chime in.
Sure.
And I'm just speaking for myself. I think these types of filters are not the solution and should not be a solution. Perhaps in very immediate, where there's an area where there's immediate concern, or specifically an immediate health concern, public safety concern, perhaps I think a lot more should be done and needs to be done addressing the problem and addressing the source of the pollution, as opposed to just a quick fix at end of pipe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I also, I know I'm known as a septic guy, but my previous life was pretty much doing stormwater management and integrated water management from septic systems to stormwater. And stormwater is very similar to the cesspools that we have here in that they were designed to get rid of the water. They weren't designed to treat the water, and there are steps that need to be taken. And what I've done in my Rhode Island days was introduce or help write legislation that had an integrated water management approach that limited impervious cover on new construction, required advanced treatment septic systems, and also required stormwater mitigation features on each individual lot to try and minimize and hold on to those contaminants and treat those contaminants, because you're going to get treatment in the soil just like you do for septic systems. And if you can do that before it gets to the pipe, that's the way to go. So I just wanted to make that.
We have that legislated here. All of those are in Sag Harbor. All new construction, I mean, that actually has been really started here now.
Can you
So-
just talk about that for a minute? Because now, is that legislation in effect already, the AI?
Yeah, first of all, again, I can't answer whether there's inspections after 3 years and what has to be replaced. I know all new construction, has, now we're looking at, I think it is legislative that we have to put in different systems. Any construction, we're much more stringent in terms of retention and slowing down water on properties. The problem out here, though, is that, we're looking at swimming pools, we're looking at larger roofs, we're looking at bigger structures. So even though it's contained, we're changing the overall environment. And we may be slowing things down through everyday use, but if we think about the fact since Hurricane Sandy, we've had no significant structural changes to anything for stormwater mitigation, except in what's has been legislated. And while I appreciate that's important, what Justin said, I think again it's always going to come back to what do you do on your property and how you control it. So,
thanks. Yes, Chrissy.
I have a question that maybe Justin or Bridget can answer. It is sort of where politics, policy, and practice intersect. Is the situation with the grants for the septic systems and the 1099s that the county issued, taxing where residents may have to report that as taxable income on the grants that they received that were supposed to cover the cost of the septic systems. How is that affecting the applications, people's desire to actually partake in these programs?
Well, Justin does a really good job on this, so I'll turn it over to him in a second. But I can tell you what I've done. I chair the Ways and Means Committee, and just as background, the Suffolk County Comptroller, who is a separately elected official, for some reason we do not know, made the decision that he should issue 1099 informational tax returns to homeowners at whose properties these septic grants had been awarded. The county program was designed, modeled after Southampton Town's program, the Maryland program, which has been underway for 10 years without any interference or objection by the Internal Revenue Service. They modeled the program in that way in order to avoid this concern. The standard rule of thumb in tax law is that 1099 follows the money. So they set up the program so that the payment of the grant goes directly to the installer. And according to the comptroller of the town of Southampton, who spoke directly to Chief Counsel, the IRS, if the money goes to the installer, the 1099 goes to the installer. In fact, you don't even need to issue a 1099 to the installer because as a routine course of business, the installers are paying taxes on that income. It's a very sort of natural, common sense, no-brainer circumstance. And that's the way the Maryland program works, that's the way the Southampton Town program works, and that's the way our program was also designed to work. This has been brought to the attention of the comptroller. Last year, the county executive engaged an outside legal consultant, a firm called Harris Beach, very well-respected firm, did a many-page legal analysis of this circumstance and gave the legal advice that, in fact, no 1099s were necessary to go to the homeowner because the money went to the installers. I've gone so far as to call on the comptroller to rescind these 1099s, but specifically just last week, I sent him a letter that detailed the specific individuals whose homes were the subject of these grants and the installations, and where we know that the vendors or the installers or the design professionals have already reported that those grants as part of their gross income. So the effect the comptroller is now on notice that the effect of insisting that the 1099 go to those homeowners is to require that Suffolk County homeowners pay taxes to Uncle Sam on money that has already been taxed. So the good news is that we have April 15th has passed. We have several months to work this out. We continue to be hopeful that the county comptroller will understand the concerns here and the fact that he's requiring homeowners to pay double taxes when they're just trying to do the right thing and install these septic systems. In the meantime, Mr. Kennedy has informed the Ways and Means Committee that he is requesting that the IRS give an opinion on this. We're confident that that'll put an end to it. If not, I have spoken to the Chief Deputy County Executive, Peter Scully, who's the water czar, and he and I have agreed that from the executive and the legislative side of things, we will do what we need to do to make this right so that the homeowners are not going to bear the burden of these taxes. But in the meantime, we're recommending that folks speak to their own tax attorneys or CPAs with regard to what to do with these 1099s. But our legal opinion, which is unassailed and based on precedent, has advised that this is not taxable income to the homeowner.
Thank you. Justin?
Sure. So I don't think I could say it any better than Legislator Fleming just said it. However, I do want to stress that this program has been modeled after the programs in other jurisdictions. It's not something that we just ignored and figured would go away. We thought about it. We asked for an independent tax counsel opinion. We received the opinion. The comptroller's office, however, felt that that opinion was not strong enough, that it needed to come from the IRS. He's requested a letter ruling from the IRS that could take up to 3 months. Speaking with homeowners, they are basically either filing for extensions to see how this plays out, or they will amend their tax returns. We've had probably about 6 to 10 people stall in the process because of this issue to see how it plays out before they move forward with installations. However, majority of the homeowners are still moving forward because they talk with their tax professional, and I'm not an accountant and I don't pretend to be. However, talk with your accountant, because just because you received a 1099 does not necessarily mean that you have to pay taxes on it, and it's really talk to your accountant about the process. And some homeowners have decided to go forward with the process and feeling that even the taxability, which typically ranges around $3,000, is still less than what they would have spent if they didn't utilize the grant and loan program.
Thank you. Bridget?
Yeah, just Christine asked about the effect on the program. As Justin mentioned, there are some people who are hesitating, but we are seeing a steady uptick in applications. I mean, this program is really starting to take off thanks to so many people like yourselves. And we're seeing, even despite this discussion, that the uptick continues to grow. And remember, this does not affect the town program. So we're in town of Southampton, town of East Hampton has a great program, Shelter Island has a great program. They work in conjunction with the county, but this issue so far has not touched those programs.
Thank you. We have another question out here. I see somebody pointing. Somebody, yes.
Hi, thanks for coming, and this is really, really informative, really great. I'm Diane Hewitt. I live in Noyak. I have a question on 2 of the topics raised. I heard about a product called Rid-X that you can pour into your septic system. Is this something that is, you're smiling, is recommended? Does it help, like, I don't know, break down any of the bad things that are going towards the bays?
So Rid-X doesn't break down anything. What essentially Rid-X does, and we don't recommend the use of any additives in septic tanks or cesspools. The whole purpose of a septic tank is to keep the solids, and the effluent then goes out to your leaching. For cesspools, they're essentially substandard. They predate the requirements from 1973. Cesspools leach the water through and retain the solids, similar to that of a septic tank. We don't want to use these chemicals and additives that they sell, and the commercials for Rid-X are priceless. They're saying, oh, look, I added this, and now I can flush my toilet again. Yes, you can. And what the reason for that is the bacteria in there stir up everything in the septic tank, and then it sends it out. It suspends those solids and sends them out to the leaching, where it causes clogging, and it'll cause clogging around the leaching pools and cause failure. So you might buy yourself a month or two, but you're going to have big problems and big backups later down the road. Stay away from any septic additives. However, there is one exception, and that's for restaurants that have a lot of grease. There are specific bacteria that are aimed to break down some of the grease, and those do work very well. So, but as far as the additives that you would buy at a commercial hardware store for septic systems, I'd say avoid it at all costs.
Have you researched any additives that might break down nitrogen?
So nitrogen, there's a couple ways to break it down. There's chemical and biological process. All these systems utilize a biological process. The county's interested in researching some chemical options to remove nitrogen. It doesn't really remove it. It binds nitrogen, and then you have to take it somewhere else to treat it. Ultimately, you need a biological process to treat the nitrogen. So these systems, these bacteria, will not do what's needed to reduce the nitrogen, because the only way to treat it is to mimic the nitrogen cycle, which requires oxygen and areas without oxygen to convert that from organic nitrogen to nitrogen gas.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. My second question is on pesticides, and I live just on the north side of Noyak Road and walk south to the bay, and on my walks I pass many yards with yellow tags that have just sprayed, and I spoke with a pesticide expert on it, someone who does the spraying, and he said that the DEC requires every pesticide applicator to put a yellow tag on no matter what the pesticide is. Is there any way we can tell whether they're like organically sprayed, or what's being sprayed? Is there, just because it looks like there's an awful lot being sprayed and going in. Is there any way we can speak to that?
Diane, in my opening remarks, I talked about the increase in residential use of pesticides. Obviously, those yellow signs are required by law with notification. I don't think they distinguish from the organic versus synthetic, but again, it's a growing concern when you consider glyphosate, an herbicide. They're showing implications to, non-target vegetation, implications even secondary to the insect populations. We've got to really start to convert these individual properties back into native landscapes to the greatest extent possible.
And people are getting so worried about spraying for ticks. I just had I had them come over and give us a quote, and because I thought we were getting organic spraying, and they said, well, it's derived from chrysanthemums. I said, well, does it kill the bees? They said, yes, it does, but we localized the spraying. So I'm like, I don't think I'm going to spray. But I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and if we could try to address that.
I just think, and what you said is important on two fronts. One is that, a poison, whether it's an organic poison or a synthetic poison, still a poison. And people tend not to, so they'll go into a hardware store and say, can I have an organic tick killer or bug killer or grub killer, or something made from chrysanthemums? Well, if you eat that, you're going to die. So it's good, I think. The neighbor notice law, which I'm familiar with, it took like 10 years to get through. And the idea was to try to help people become aware that this stuff was actually happening. And again, I see it in my neighborhood right now. Most people don't know what their lawn is sprayed for. They hire somebody, gets sprayed, whatever. And there are hundreds of chemical pesticides, organic, synthetic, that any registered applicator can put down. So I think what Kevin says is exactly right. Until you change the baseline behavior, it almost doesn't matter whether we know whether it's organic or inorganic or where it came from. It's a poison, and it's intended to kill things. That's why you put it on there. Now, it may be that some of the things that are killed you don't want, but we also find out that these non-target organisms get hammered as much as the thing that you're after. And so I think, and this is again to the bayscaping issue, the more you plant things that belong here that don't need extra care, the more that you can take turf away and basically leave things natural, the better off the environment is, and I think over time the better off we all are in terms of exposure.
Right, and just to add, that reminded me, I put myself on the no spray list. I don't know if people know about that still, but I get reminded every year. I get a letter say that I don't want mosquito spraying near my property, and I have to fax it back.
I just wanted to make one point. Yes, state law requires these pesticide applicators to advertise when they sprayed, and usually, those little signs. But no one requires a homeowner who goes to the hardware store and buys Roundup, which is glyphosate. No one requires that homeowner to post their property, and that's what's scary.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Did I see a question coming from this side of the room? Yes. Simon?
Just a closing thought on something else that I read, because I'm a citizen scientist, that makes me a scientist, right? I've heard the widespread use of DDT clouded a lot of neighborhoods, and it killed a keystone hornet whose main diet was ticks. So if we overdo pesticides, we're not going to know what's going to happen. I think it's happening now, especially with methoprene and bifenthrin and Talstar. There are a lot of products which are used on especially malls to kill everything except the flowers that are planted there. So I would opt on the no pesticides.
Thank you. And I
I'd just
see
like
Kevin
to
has
resonate one word or a couple of words, unintended consequences to the pesticide application.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I'm turning this back over to Gavin.
Thank you all for joining us. As usual, we could talk for hours on these subjects. Thank you to our panelists, to our sponsors for the whole series. We'll be back in October with another Express Sessions event. Until then, May 2nd at the Sag Harbor Inn Arts and Culture Series. Thank you all very much.